Welcome to Quirky Queen's Journals. My name's Kirsten. So I'm doing an abstract painting today using watercolours, watercolour mediums, and then finishing off with some acrylic mediums. So this is 300 GSM watercolour paper. It's cold pressed, so it has a slight grain. This is just a stick of willow charcoal, and I'm just outlining. I like to start with a shape and some defined lines. I like shapes that are a bit droopy in nature, and so they look a bit kind of graceful and awkward. I am going over the charcoal lines with black acrylic ink. Now, I'm using the charcoal lines as a guide, so when this stage is finished, I'll have some of the charcoal line work still obvious, and then I'll have the sort of thicker acrylic lines as well. The other thing is using the dropper and sort of changing the speed and the pressure up when you're doing that can give you a variation in the line thickness, and I really like that because it adds to the sort of awkwardness that I'm trying to create in the picture. So the acrylic ink took about an hour to dry. There are a couple of spots that are still slightly damp, and as you can see there, it just gets pulled into the watercolour medium that we're using just now, and I just use it to create a shaded area basically. So this is texture medium. It's designed to be used with watercolour, and how I've been using it is I just pour some of it out onto the flat surface, and to me I'm almost using it like a sort of matte medium like you would with acrylic paint. So what this does is I feel that it makes the watercolour slightly more syrupy and easier to manipulate and leave like brush strokes in, and sort of help create shape with it, as you'll see later on. The other medium I am using here is ox gall liquid. The ox gall liquid, you just add 3 to 4 drops to a cup of water. You use it very sparingly, and to me it compares to like high flow medium with acrylic paints. It helps the paint travel faster consistently, so it makes it kind of thinner and spread out more. The third watercolour medium I am using is granulation medium. It's used to create a more inconsistent wash with the watercolour. So instead of a very flat, smooth, consistent block colour, it will behave in a more, you'll get darker grains and lighter grains, and it just makes it much more interesting to work with and helps to create a sort of textured look. Now, the thing with the granulation medium is you can use it before, during and after. I'm sure that the effects will vary depending on when you use it and also how dilute or concentrated it is. I've just been using it straight. The texture medium can be used before, during or after. Mix it in with watercolour, apply it to the paper, then apply the watercolour, etc. That's some of the granulation medium on the paper there. So I'm just wiping it up. So the ox gall liquid, which is like the high flow, I have that in a cup of water. And what I do is I'll apply the paint in like a corner, and then I'll sort of meet the paint from another corner with the oxgall liquid in the water, and it just creates a nice, I like the way that the paint kind of is allowed to blend together with it. So we're still at the first stage of the painting here. Everything is still wet, so everything has been worked into wet, apart from the acrylic ink, obviously, the watercolour. So I've been using Kuritake watercolours, and the colours that I've used for this painting are indigo, maroon and yellow ochre. Later on I'll use a pale blue horizon and bluish gold. So that granulation fluid that's sitting on the paper and on the sort of lid with the dried paint in it had some of the maroon paint in it. Now you can see here I'd applied some of that maroon paint with the granulation fluid, and then I've just came into one corner and, put a light bit of indigo in, and as that dries they should kind of meet and blend seamlessly together. That's my plan anyway. So that's more texture fluid medium that I was putting on there, and then that's yellow ochre sitting on top of it. Now the top right yellow ochre is just the granulation fluid, and then in the middle the yellow ochre is on the texture medium, and you can see the difference in the indigo has the texture medium as well, and you can see the difference in the consistency of the paint. Now here I am just drawing in some indigo lines. I should mention this brush is just a cheap brush from a set. It's a round brush. Yeah, so you can see there the way that I'm painting those lines into that yellow ochre where the texture medium was, and the indigo has the texture medium, and you wouldn't be able to do that wet on wet and for that line to remain solid like that and not just blend into each other. So that really was, it made it so much more enjoyable to work with, much easier to work with. So you can see here on the indigo, I've added in some of the maroon with the granulation fluid in it, and the granulation fluid is almost pushed the texture fluid, the paint with the texture medium in it aside, and it's allowed me to create this sort of swirly shape in it. The texture medium has almost become a bit stringy. So, I was over the moon about that. So here I'm kind of almost like what you see people doing with, what's it called? When the paint lies on top of the water bath. I used a little stick there, the stick, and I'm able to actually make swirly shapes or, drag lines through the paint and manipulate it. And it just creates some lovely textures. It also helps you maybe have some, like these red dots here. To me, they're starting to look more flowery, and some of them there's a variety in there. Some of them look bigger, some look smaller, some look darker, some look lighter, some look sharper, some look more blurred, and it's just very nice. See, you can see there a little bit of that indigo in the texture paint. That was a little stringy bit, and I've actually just taken that off. So this bit here is a disaster. this had been allowed to dry, and I thought, oh, I want to protect that swirly shape in case I cannot recreate it. Well, I didn't realise you can't put masking fluid over the paint, and that's what I did. So what it did is it's basically pulled the paint that was underneath it away. So we lost most of the swirl, but we've still got a hint of it, and I actually like the small shape that's been created there. I think it's in a nice position, so we're looking for the silver lining here. So I've put some of that texture medium down in that bottom right corner, and what I'm doing is I'm swirling on the yellow ochre paint on top of it. Now you can see there, that's actually, I just really like how you're able to create this with the watercolour. But this section of the video is more about the kind of mistakes and the overworking that I did. Obviously I used the masking fluid over the paint and pulled my design off. That bottom right hand corner, I couldn't leave it alone, and I kept overworking it. The other issue I ended up having here was that my paper was starting to warp. Although it's actually a good brand of paper, Bockingford, it's probably me and, you know, my heavy-handedness, but I did start getting quite a bit of warping. So when I'm trying to run the paints, you know, using either the Oxgall liquid or the granulation medium, when I'm trying to kind of create a flow for them to run into each other, it's obviously too wet for the paper, especially doing it in multiple layers. This is me trying to repair that little section. We get there in the end. I was happy with this in the end, but as you'll see, that maroon section in the middle, I do end up with problems with that. So I just dropped a bit of the indigo in there, and that cup of water on the top left corner that looks quite yucky, that's the one with the Oxgall liquid. And do you see the way the indigo just flows with it, and it's just lovely. But because the paper's warping, we're starting to get pools developing. So I ended up swirling it in, and it actually left me some nice lines. So by this stage, I would say all three mediums are kind of everywhere. I thought I would try and recreate the swirls with this here, so I'm adding in some of the indigo with the texture medium. But there's too much liquid. Then that happened. So I took a step back, cleaned it off, and then I just add a bit more in, and I let it dry again. I just leave a couple more of the watercolour bits in, and then we're going to move on to the acrylic mediums. So here the indigo with the texture medium had started a sort of stripy look, so I'm just enhancing that further with the brush, and then I'm having some of the maroon at the side, and I'm hoping it'll look like the sort of more solid maroon, and the indigo stripes will kind of just blend in and out of each other. And I'm just adding more swirls into that bottom right corner. This is really, I think that I could tell it wasn't working the same as it did before, but I kept persevering, and I should have just left it alone. I think that the texture medium, when I did it the first time round, I think it had actually been allowed to dry a bit more, so it had responded better. I think I'm trying to work into it while it's still quite wet here, and you can see it's just getting quite muddy. Although I will say that's the first kind of real muddiness that I'd had to deal with, so I do think the mediums help with that as well. There we go. So this is it dry now, and I'm going to use the acrylic mediums. I've done a couple more washes round about. I'm actually doing the background before I move on to the acrylic mediums. So I'm using that water with the Oxgall liquid in it to create this sort of high flow dampness round about. And then this is rose beige. That was another colour I used. Yeah, it is rose beige. And it's really just to make the background less stark white, and to be less of a block colour. So when that was dried, I've added in, this is glass bead gel. This dries translucent, and the glass beads sort of almost distort the paint that's underneath it, and it's as if you're looking through glass. You can see it here a bit more close up. I really like it. I think that when you've got quite a simple blended wash on over it, it just helps to add in a bit more. It just makes the pattern, you have to peer a bit more to be able to kind of interpret the pattern that's underneath and see that it is actually just a wash. I hope that makes sense. It also feels very lovely too. I also think it's a subtle way to add variation to the painting without having to use lots of different media or techniques. So this one is sand texture gel. This is similar to the glass bead gel, but there's much more of the kind of sand particles. And again, it just looks a bit different and it feels a bit different. And it's just another way to add variety and interest. So you'll see it here. I've got the glass bead gel over some of the patterned areas, and I've got the sand texture gel and over some of the pattern areas, and the differences are subtle, but they're just, I think it gives it a bit more of an ethereal look. You can see it up close here. So this is the sand texture gel going over the red dotted area, and then you can see some of the glass bead gel in other areas. So I'm going to let this dry, but I just really like how it looks. So the acrylic mediums have dried. You can see there it's just very subtle, but I just love the ethereal look it has. So the white paper, there is a lot of white paper here, and it's basically a solid shape on a white paper. And I just wanted to add in a bit more of a supportive background. So we've used the acrylic ink for the sort of main shapes, and I didn't want to use that again. And we've also used the charcoal, so I thought I'll use the black ink tints pencil, and that will help just create more variety in the line work, and also kind of give a separation between the background and the main droopy, awkward shape that I've created. To me it looks like a duck dancing with her handbag in her mouth. Maybe with an umbrella. Anyway, that's irrelevant. Yeah, so the black intense pencil will react with water, but only once. After that, it is permanent. So, yeah, I'm very carefully and hesitantly adding these lines because I'm like, oh, I'm going to ruin it. But I haven't. I was actually very pleased. I do think that they did help. I felt the two hills at the top were maybe a bit much. But I used, colour washes to kind of manage that. So that's me just adding some of the Oxgall liquid in the water, high flow. I think that's what I used with the Inktense pencil as well, to be honest. I'm added in a bit of yellow ochre, and I managed to catch a little bit of the Inktense ink as well in it. So I felt that was quite nice because it echoes the yellow ochre we did at the start where it had caught the acrylic ink. And then I felt it was very much like the duck person was kind of suspended in the air and she kind of needs a bit of grounding. So I do make this bottom section darker. It really is quite amazing. I was really scared it would ruin it, but I actually think adding in that line work actually kind of made the picture for me. So this is the pale blue, horizon blue it's called, out the Kuretake watercolours. And I'm really just using it like I did with the rose beige before we used the acrylic mediums, and just trying to build up a less of a block colour in the background. So the backgrounds will mostly remain quite pale, but there's going to be hints of the blue and there'll be hints of some gold, of which I was nervous about using because the gold has an iridescent effect, so when the light catches it, it's really quite strong. But I felt with the acrylic mediums that it might help provide a bit of balance, and I did use it quite sparingly. And I also added in some black acrylic ink with it, which you'll see, just to try and make it less... it makes it a bit more bronze looking, a bit duller, but still has that kind of shine on it. You'll see when I do it. But do you see there the difference that pale blue's making? I'm going to put a bit of gold at this side here, just so light I think you can hardly tell that I've used it. And I'm making sure I've got plenty of that Oxgall high flow medium stuff to make sure it spreads well. But you need to remember as well that I've got quite a lot of warping in this paper now. So you can see the pools starting to develop, but I'm trying to work with it. It's very hard when you get near the end of the painting. You don't want to overdo it because then you're like, right, I should have stopped at that last step. I've overdone it, it's ruined. But at the same time, if it doesn't feel finished, then why would you accept that either? I know you can put it to one side. I wasn't putting this picture to the side, I loved it. So this is me starting to bring in the charcoal lines as part of the picture now, and this is the first time that I've kind of acknowledged them. So I'm going to make this black acrylic paint and gold kind of mixture with the granulation fluid. So the granulation fluid will help it be less blocky, as in we'll get different hints, different darknesses and lightnesses of the gold, and I'm just putting in the tiniest little bit. I think I just touched the dropper to the plastic lid rather than letting it get close to start with. So that's my mixture there, and I know I need to give a grounding to the duck lady person, but I also know it still needs to be in the background. It's actually really quite difficult doing that. I was pleased that I've come up with this. It's creating these solid shapes but keeping them as a background, and then it's trying to... What I've done here is I do it in the top corner, and then I use the Oxgall liquid in the water to help it so that there isn't a line, so it blends into the white paper. My heart was quite racing during this. The other thing that I've kind of realised with the watercolours is you really do need to let them just move themselves. I was always encouraging it to move, but you need to just trust the process that as it's drying, it will move. I mean, I don't use a heat gun or anything, I let it dry naturally. I do think that's a lot better now. I think we've got a really good background, but it's still the background. And I've got one more acrylic medium to use. I actually think it would have been much harder to create a background that, you know, without the use of those acrylic mediums on the main shape. Because that's kind of elevated that and given it something to keep it together. And now the background, we can actually, you know, using gold in the background is not an easy thing to do. And I'm not saying I've mastered it or anything. What I'm saying is it's been lovely to be able to use it that way. So I'm just trying to create some areas here that just look a bit more like it might be like, you know, a cast shadow like off that handbag that I think's a handbag. So this is black lava texture gel. This is probably my favourite medium out of them all. So I'm mixing this with some heavy gel medium. And I'm doing that so that the black particles, they're like black sand, disperse further. So it's like a weaker concentration of it. And I'm going to apply that. And then the areas where it feels more like a sort of shadow should be, I'm going to apply it neat from the jar. I do have a lot of mediums here, but I have purchased them over time, not all in one go because it would be expensive. And I was also gifted some of them as well from a relative. So the other thing to decide as well is where I'm actually going to place this. So the idea is still to keep the kind of gold in the background as what's kind of grounding the main shape. But I don't want it to just be, we've got a couple of kind of bronzy areas and then the rest is quite white. So this is just adding a bit more interest to the background but not taking over. That's how I feel about it. And I like this bit here, the bit I'm working on just now, because I feel that, I feel that it's almost the middle area that combines the background and the main shape together. It spreads so easily with the heavy gel medium in it. It spreads pretty easy anyway, but it's just more so. And then I'm going to add some into the charcoal lines. That made me happy that I included them. I felt like that was exactly what it needed to finish it off, because once I'd added in the kind of concentrated one, I actually felt like that's the picture finished. And that's a rare feeling. So do you see there just the difference? It is neat from the jar, and it does allow it to look darker, but it doesn't take away from the darkness of the gold. I don't know why I added this bit, it just felt like it was needed. Kinda is needed. So there we have it, that's it all dried, and I'll show you the picture in different, top, middle and bottom, and then I'll show you the full picture. I really hope you enjoyed, and thanks very much for watching, and take care, and I hope to see you soon. The other thing is, it's just feels so lovely, all those different mediums on it. So this is the top. My missing swirls. Bye.